Everybody, I wanted to do a snackable lab today talking about OpenClaw. This is not going to be uh, a webcast that is just going to go through what is OpenClaw, how to set it up. I'm going to assume you've already gone past that and or at least know what OpenClaw is. We'll certainly put some links and I'll share some things that will help you set it up, but that's not what this lab is about. I really wanted to get into a real life scenario use case on using OpenClaw and leveraging other AI tools to actually put everything together. So those that have seen the AI files already, you know that I'm an avid weather enthusiast. I like to not only storm chase, but provide insights on weather to local residents around where I live. I live in Delaware, so the target area is around Delmarva. So let me talk about the use case and then get into really what I built. And again, the whole idea of this is a real life use case around using OpenClaw and the agents that we can create. But then more importantly, how do I tie that into existing quote unquote tools, things like Facebook and websites. So what, let me tell you why, why we're talking about it or why I'm talking about it. Again, everything that I do usually revolves around like a real life scenario or situation. In this case, it's about weather. So the thought was like, how can I use these agents? How can I use OpenClaw to connect into the things that are needed from a weather perspective? Again, weather doesn't sleep, it changes all the time. So we needed a timely way of getting trustworthy content out to different audiences, whether or not it was a website or Facebook, without burning one person out, aka me and my partner that runs the weather for the Delmarva area through a company that we have called US Weather Warriors. So what we tried to do is, previously it was, all right, do we have time to actually create a forecast and put that out? That takes a lot of time to devote into creating that content. So me with my AI background, I'm like, well, can we get bots or agents that will generate morning forecasts, put alerts out, do marine forecasts? I live very close to the water. I also live in an area that has a lot of farming, so growing forecasts, as well as then things that it would be targeted to just me and my partner here in crime, that being Kyle. So like daily forecast or briefings, chase targets. We do chase tornadoes and other severe storms, things that we would be able to use to consume. So that's the background. Like being able to have a real life use case, which this is, how can we take advantage of these AI capabilities? So the end-to-end pattern here and what was built is, where does the data actually live? That lives in official weather information, that being things from the National Weather Service, the Severe Prediction Center, other information from NOAA, from marine forecasts. That all goes and gets pulled in by these bots. So I have these agents, quote unquote, the OpenClaw bots, and there's a bunch of them, but they're based upon schedulers that kick them off, data fetchers, like they'll grab that data from where I just mentioned, and then things that build upon prompts that will send data out. Now, the LLM written drafts, this is again incorporated into OpenClaw or these agents. These will spawn off sub-agents that will actually write the content. Large language model written drafts that are being done through GPT 5.4 mini. It puts it into a quote unquote brand voice and a structured prompt that aligns with the things that we want to deliver. Now, we say this all the time. I say this, Shadab says this, you do not want to just go and trust the things that AI is going to produce. You want some human intervention or human in the loop. So it's a human approval. So what I've instructed these agents to do is send out the content after it goes through its data fetching and structures the information. It will send it out as a telegram. So this is a telegram channel inside of OpenClaw, but then also sends out an email. And that's structured to an approval that we, again, me or Kyle, will actually go and approve. Now, what that does, once it goes through an approval, it sends it out through Facebook and or to the website. So it actually does Facebook posting and publishes it out to the website. Now, these are all integrated into the whole OpenClaw system. So what's interesting about this is that this workflow is the same for every bot that was created, and there's a lot of bots that were out there. So what I want to reintroduce here is that what this lab is not about. I'm not going to go through a tutorial on OpenClaw. There's plenty of things out there that you can go and read. I'm not going to go through the plumbing of the Telegram bot father and the setup. There's things that you need to do there, and again, these are well documented. We have email systems that are connected. I'm not going to go through the Gmail app and how you get integration there. Not going to go through the constructs of building files and quote unquote. This is not about hyping real forecast or replacement. What this quote unquote little snackable lab is again how to design an operational system. How do you build the different agents, roles, and prompts and the fallbacks? How do you create a workflow that's actually trustworthy? And again, that's that human in the loop. And then how do you build the site that will actually integrate with these bots? And then what worked, what didn't, and what actually things that we changed. So the first thing that I want to mention is that there's a website. This is where the integration of these bots will actually land. So again, this is not a focus on context engineering, but that's actually what this is. So vibe coding, whatever you want to call it, context coding. I used Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code and GitHub Copilot inside of Visual Studio Code to actually build the whole front end. Literally, this was something that was built in 2 days using the vibe coding, context engineering through Visual Studio Code. So the front end, the styling, the database connection. I've got a PostgreSQL that's behind the scenes on this. The actual hosting. This is actually all being deployed into Azure Container Apps, and I'm using infrastructure as code that was vibe coded or context engineered inside of Visual Studio to do that. So we're going to bypass that. The important part here is I had the whole website and where these things needed to go, quote unquote, the forecast inside of the website. So I had Visual Studio Code create the stub of the contract that needed to go into the OpenClaw environment. So basically, I had Visual Studio Code say, this is where all the stubs need to go. Here's the open APIs that are being used inside of that website. And this is what you, OpenClaw, need to align with. The reason why I mention this is I took that markdown file and I brought it into OpenClaw and said, here's my website, here's the contract, go create the integration that you need to go from the OpenClaw box into the website. So the bottom line is I'm using AI to help me construct and build those AI bots. All right, so once I had that website constructed and that quote unquote contract, what is really happening inside of OpenClaw? So this is the agent runtime. So OpenClaw itself, it has 6 major parts. One is the cron scheduler to kick off these different agents. And that's the great thing about OpenClaw. You don't just build an agent, but you align that with a scheduled run. So all these different bots actually have been kicked off at different times during the day. There's the model bridge. So inside of OpenClaw, there's this concept of models. And right now in this OpenClaw environment, it's called a gateway. So the gateway is connected by default into my Copilot or my GitHub Copilot environment. So I have OpenClaw signed in, or at least understands my GitHub Copilot, and that exposes the models that are inside of GitHub Copilot. So for me, I have all the GPT models. I have Opus, and I have a couple of other models in there as well. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I have Claude models. Opus is one of them. The reason why I mentioned the Opus piece, and I'll talk a little bit about this more when I jump into the OpenClaw environment, is the LLM that's running for creating the content. I'm using the 5.4 mini, but in my use of OpenClaw to build other agents, I'm switching that to Opus 4.7. I'm using a more capable model to build the different components that I need, but my day-to-day running of building the quote unquote content that goes out into the website or Facebook, it's using 5.4 mini. So I'm token optimizing the things that I'm actually using by switching different models. I have Telegram, as I mentioned. This is actually being used to send the approvals and rejects. The other thing, side note, I'm using Telegram when I come up with ideas of a new bot. I'm literally using my Telegram channel to communicate with the OpenClaw to build new things. I have the Gmail router. Again, OpenClaw sends out the emails. I have a skill gateway. So every bot has its own set of skills. And then I also have a state store inside of OpenClaw. This is to keep track of the various different approvals. So the bot network, what I actually have built is a series of bots. Again, these are the forecasts, the daily forecast marine, farmers. I have severe weather and alert explainer. Then I have these internal things, which are like the forecast of briefings, as I mentioned before, like chase targets. And I could also do soundings. Again, this is more a little bit deeper on like the mechanics of meteorology. But I have these internal as well as public facing pieces. So the trusted sources, as I mentioned, these bots are actually pulling in data. So it's actually Python code that it's written to extract data. So I have 5 different data sources that it's pulling from: the National Weather Service. We have area forecast discussions. National Weather Service actually has an API, which is really good. So you can interrogate different regions. It's got everything from like alerts to just daily forecasts. I'm also pulling from the Storm Prediction Center for outlooks that they have, as well as mesoscale discussions, any watches that they may put out. I've got the Weather Prediction Center. This is really for rainfall and guidance, as well as the NOAA marine products that they put out. So, so this all flows into the bots, and then the pattern that I'm using for the large language models. So the OpenClaw bots pull that data, it grabs it, and then it reuses it for any one of those different quote unquote forecast bots that I mentioned. So as I mentioned before, we have this gathering process to pull the data, but then something that actually builds the prompt calls the models out to the GPT 5.4 and then returns text. And that ultimately gets sent into the large language model calls that actually builds that content. I mentioned already about the human in the loop. This is super important because I don't want anything or just anything going out into the um, the Facebook site or the website. So the bots actually create a structure of what it's going to look like. Then it gets sent out to those 2 different channels, email or Telegram, and then we have an approval. It literally is an approval ID. We approve it. That sends it back to OpenClaw, where there's additional jobs. We actually have job checkers, again, all created through OpenClaw, that actually will approve or reject something. And then ultimately it publishes out. So these are the jobs. And again, you can see we've got cron jobs. These are tied to the LLM. The thing that's actually really running this is the systemd user timers. These get pulled every 15 minutes to actually check, hey, did someone approve a daily forecast, a marine forecast? Or was there someone that sent in, hey, here's my sounding, go analyze this. So these are running every 15 minutes versus the OpenClaw cron jobs, which get passed over from the systemd ones. So the website integration, again, this is where we tie back into the website itself. This is security enforced as well at the endpoint. So we have API keys, all secured inside of the Azure Container app. So there's obviously safeties and guardrails, what we can do in terms of the soft skills that we have inside of these bots, as well as then the secrets and things that are not leaked out. So let me just show you some of these things. I'll get into the website, show you the end product, but then I'll jump into the actual OpenClaw environment. So let me show you what this thing looks like at the end. So this is the website. As I mentioned before, this is what I had constructed very quickly through doing context engineering through the Visual Studio Code. Again, literally within 2 days had this constructed. But you see, it's a pretty in-depth website. If I jump to my forecasts, these are the different forecasts from the OpenClaw environment that land here. Again, for me going through this is not about like, hey, look at these forecasts, but it's more about the real world applicability to what OpenClaw is doing. So if I look at this Growcast, you see the OpenClaw run. This is the run inside of OpenClaw, and this is how we actually say, all right, approve the OpenClaw GCA, and then whatever that number is. So here's the, the forecast. This is all generated by the bot and the LLM itself. I'm not going to read through all of that, but this is where it lands. As I said before, there's many different things that come out of this website. Here's the morning forecast as an example. Let me just update this. So here's the forecast, the daily forecast. Again, different constructs. All right, let me jump into OpenClaw. So I've got a virtual machine that I'm connected into. This is actually my I repurposed an old Dell machine. I put Ubuntu on it, and this is where OpenClaw is running. So this is running on a Linux box. So here is that environment. Now let me mention a couple of different things. So I'm inside OpenClaw, as I mentioned before. This is the Linux Ubuntu. OpenClaw itself runs within a directory .openclaw. Now there's a lot of different things in here, and it'll take a lot of time to explain everything. The main thing is that your agents and things that you build are in workspaces. So that workspace, again, here's the main things about OpenClaw, like its soul, its memory, identity, the different agents. The thing that I built is the US Weather Warriors or USWW Weather Agent. This is where all of those agents actually live. So there's different things that are created in here. You'll see it's got its soul, it's got its identification of the agents, it's got the different prompts and scripts, the different source files. So everything that I had created through the use of using the OpenClaw user interface, it all got generated through here, and these are all the Python pieces. So let me just get out of that. This is a real life example of what I was actually doing today. Here is actually just ran one of my things. So here's an example where I was running the forecast, and I literally did not see one of the approvals come through. So I literally just talked to OpenClaw and I said, hey, today's morning forecast ran. I approved it through your email, but I didn't see it appear in the website or the Facebook. Can you publish directly? But also, can you investigate why? So this is an example. I'm using the TUI, which is the user interface for OpenClaw. And it said, yeah, all right, let me go post it, and then let me investigate. So it actually looked at the reason why it wasn't, able to post. It found something in there, and it automatically fixed it. And I told it to go look at the other checkers, quote unquote, the things that are actually looking at the approvals, and it said, yeah, I found the same thing and actually fixed it. So this is, a great thing that it could do. It changed those things directly, which is awesome. Now, let me just get to the bottom of this. I'll show you a couple different things inside of it. So there's different commands inside of OpenClaw. So if I say, go do the model picker, this actually shows me the different models inside of OpenClaw that it has available to me. I mentioned about my GitHub, but I also have Codex connected to this OpenClaw environment as well. That allows me to use my ChatGPT subscription, which then allows me to use Codex in those models. I also have LM Studio on another machine. So I have a workstation that has the ability to run small language models. And you can see here that I have the Quen models connected to this, the Quen 3.6 and the Coder v.next. I started doing that because my initial Codex use, I ran out of tokens. So since I have a NVIDIA 5070 TI GPU, I was able to run models locally. But then I also connected it into GitHub Copilot, and that's where I'm actually running these things now. I mentioned that because if I'm doing any development, quote unquote, where I want OpenClaw to investigate, build new bots, I'm using the Opus 4.7, but my model gateway is tied into the 5.4 mini. So again, optimizing the way that I use pieces. Now, I'll just do one thing right here. I'll tell it, please Oops. And I forgot that I'm still in my model picker. Let me do the 4.7. I'll say, please run the afternoon Delmarva forecast update. And then auto approve to Facebook and my website. So basically, I'm telling it to run the bot. Now, this would kick off automatically because it's tied into cron jobs, but cron jobs in the system D stuff. But I'm interacting with the OpenClaw environment. It knows what bots are out there, so it's actually doing this. It may come back and ask me, do I really want to auto approve? But in essence, I'm actually working with this environment as we speak. Now, I'm going to let this run. I want to come back and actually show you a couple of different things. So the environment that I had, I actually used Visual Studio, and actually I probably should have showed you that. So I have Visual Studio Code running in this OpenClaw environment. So I have I opened up that project folder that I showed you before, and I pushed this up to GitHub in a repro. Now, I could theoretically, if I wanted to, just use the GitHub Copilot against this project and have it build the things that I want. But let me just stay in OpenClaw and use it directly that way. So you literally have multiple ways of actually updating and changing the things that you want. I'm just doing it directly here. But the reason why I wanted to point that out is here's that GitHub environment. It has all the different agents, so I could actually look at all these things. And so it's just a good practice, obviously, to put this back up to GitHub. Hopefully, knock on wood, nothing happens to my Dell machine that's running OpenClaw. But if it does, I have everything up here in the GitHub repro. Now, let me go back to my machine, and hopefully this is going to be done. It's actually still running it. So the bottom line, this may take a little while because it's running this whole process of running that forecast. But in essence, I wanted to show you a real world scenario of using OpenClaw, how you can use, and there you go, I'm not creating the approval. So it's a real life scenario. You use OpenClaw to build the Claude bots that you want, and I'm leveraging other AI capabilities, aka GitHub Copilot, to construct or build the other components that I'm actually tying back into. And there you go. You see it just updated into Facebook, and I just updated my website, and this will be a good little test. So I should see an update on my website for the afternoon forecast. Let me just redo that. Go to the homepage, and lo and behold, there you go. There's my afternoon forecast that literally got pushed through from that bot inside of OpenClaw on my Linux environment. So now you see the two that are interconnected between the Linux OpenClaw and my website. So again, hopefully that was insightful. It's a real life scenario of using these things and how you should or can think about how OpenClaw could be used and ways that I could actually develop inside of it, as well as then how I can build applications that tie back into the OpenClaw output. So with that, thanks again, everybody, and hopefully you found this useful. And keep on listening to the AI files. Subscribe if you haven't, and tell your friends, get them to come and check out our content. Thanks again.